Welcome to Old Grump's Garage. I'm grumpy, but coffee helps. One of the things we see a lot with these older trucks is this big greasy mess all over the engine. And they get so greasy, it's kind of hard to determine, is it the water pump leaking? Is it the intake leaking? Is it the valve cover gaskets giving up? And because this one's got a mixture of substances when you wipe it off your finger that indicate water and oil, we're just going to go ahead and put some degreaser on it to try to limit how much crud is on there so we can begin to figure out where we want to go. If you notice, these valve covers are just a layer of rust. So one of the things I want to do is pull them off and put on a new set of valve cover gaskets, a new set of valve covers, and clean that up. And then we can move forward with figuring out if there's any other leaks or what the myriad of other leaks are. Typically what we see is with a vehicle this age, even though this isn't the factory engine, the valve covers were put on with cork gaskets, which over years begin to deteriorate and seep, or they didn't use any gaskets at all. They just squirted some silicone in there, and that some of it squirted out, and they may not have used spreader bars, so they torqued the bolts down real hard, which pulls a dimple in the valve cover, which then it seats right under the bolt, and then there's about an 18-inch gap between the bolts where it's not seated, and the oil just runs out hickly-pickly hither and thither. And side note, in some parts of the country, they don't call it oil. We were at a racetrack one night, and a guy turned the car over, and when they turned it back over on its wheels, he came flying by and hollered into the pits, "Get me a quart of Earl." So if you live in those parts of the country, we may be leaking some Earl. So now after rinsing it, we can actually see the exhaust manifold and the spark plugs and head bolts, and we can see the boss on the block where the fuel pump bolts and the cross member under the engine. So I think we're getting somewhere. Now we got a great big lake on the floor to dry up, but you don't want to start the truck after you spray this stuff until it's rinsed off. So I just went ahead and made a mess in the floor. The floor is a mess anyhow. Now I can clean the floor up when we're done. If you have a painted shop floor, I suggest you do this outside. Hey y'all, if you've made it this far, how about do me a favor and go ahead and click the like button, and go ahead and subscribe there too. That way when you're on YouTube, if we posted a new video, it'll pop up in your feed and you can see it there and see if whatever the topic is we're working on this week is something of your interest. It helps us a whole lot to keep the channel going, and we greatly appreciate your support. We now return you to your regularly scheduled program. All right, so let's dig down to those valve covers. Fortunately for me, this was in the early days when they started small controls, so getting the valve covers is going to be pretty easy on this one. As you can see, we can already see that we can reach all 4 bolts, and basically taking those 4 bolts out and pulling that PCV valve, we'll be ready to clean her up. When we got done cleaning the top of this engine, I got the mouse sucker 6000 out and did a little vacuuming, and lo and behold, I started finding broken pecan holes on top of the engine. So apparently it had been sitting somewhere a little while, and mice and squirrels had decided it was useful. This one's got spreader bars, but if you'll notice, they're very short. I really like the longer ones that really spread the load out. It keeps it from dimpling the valve cover and eliminates opportunity for leakage. We go back together, I'll show you the ones that I really like. None of these valve covers bolts seem to be tight, so it kind of indicates why they might be leaking. That one was the first one that was actually snug. So that kind of gives me a little bit of a hint that some of this oil leak on the front of this engine was front 2 valve cover gasket bolts not being snug. You know, a lot of people say, well, it's got a lot of miles on it, which honestly we can't determine because this truck is labeled for 4.3 V6. So I have no idea of being able to tell when this V8 was put in. I just appreciate that somebody did it for us and saved me all the grief I have to do it. And it runs good, starts good, drives good. So on the budget we're on, I'm not going to just junk a motor I don't know the history on. If it's drivable, we're going to clean her up and use her. And see, that one was hardly even finger tight as well. So this might not solve all the leaks, but it's definitely going to solve at least a couple. Now, PCV valve just comes at, there we go. He's zip tied down too. And that's nothing that my stake-on pliers can't resolve. Oh. And not tight anymore, is it? All right, moment of truth. I always grit my teeth when I pull valve covers off because I'm afraid what I'm going to see inside. Ooh, not too shabby. Alrighty. So, if you look at that, you're going to see that real old cork valve cover gasket. And in some of these places, like right in here, it's like paper thin and brittle. And over here, it's thick. So, it's pretty greasy. But the nice part is the inside of the valve cover is not gunked up. So somebody has been changing oil in this motor, and kudos to those individuals. I greatly appreciate them. I'll just find a convenient place to throw those old valve cover gaskets. Valve covers out, rather. They won't be going back on. I've got a few improvements to do. Doesn't feel like there's any RTV on this head. The surface just feels like cast iron. Yep, clean dried up. I am really celebrating the fact that I'm not seeing a bunch of sludge and gunk in here. I laugh when I look back when I first started driving in the early 80s. My dad had us using Quaker State oil because that's what he grew up on in the 50s. And later in life, I come to find out that it was based on some paraffin wax that really did some ugly things inside engines and valve covers. And I saw a picture the other day of me with a brand new 1986 Square Body K5 Blazer. I was trail riding in North Georgia on Highway 1. I've got on a Quaker State hat, and I kind of shuddered a little bit when I saw it and was like, ee. Yeah, buddy. So, going back together, we're going to do a little something different. When I was racing short track, we had to go in and out of the valve covers on a pretty regular basis to adjust valves for hydraulic roller cams and solid cams and all that kind of stuff. So, to make things easy getting the gasket on, instead of using the bolts like this had from the factory, we use something like this where we put a stud in the head. The valve cover gasket then sits down nicely on that. It'll hold it in place while you're putting your valve cover on, and you don't have the fight of worrying about does the gasket move, does it squirm or cause a leak and that kind of thing. You don't have to do this, but like the guy says, it helps. Thank you. Alrighty. We got our studs in place. Now we're ready to put on the valve cover gasket. Once again, this is going to be a personal preference thing, but I really like these Felpros. They've got a metal piece inside, and then they're rubber on the outside or silicone, so they're reusable. Again, from racing, taking valve covers on and off almost every weekend, this keeps you from having to do cleanup and use a scraper to get stuff off the valve cover and all that. This gasket doesn't wear out like the cork does. It doesn't become saturated and start leaking. So it's kind of what I like to go to. I won't be taking these valve covers on and off a whole bunch. I know at some point, as you notice, this is a 2-barrel engine with a stock cast iron 2-barrel intake. And that doesn't flip my trigger. So I know at some point we'll be going back in this engine to swap out the intake and the carburetor. And when we do, I may need to pull these valve covers off to make that work out nicely. So it'll be nice that I've used the reusable gaskets to make that even easier. So here's our new valve covers. You know, not too terribly expensive, but it sure dresses the old engine up, so why not? Looks better than the unpainted ones. And after saving a bunch of money on those wheels, I can afford some valve covers. Still painted steel, actually powder coated steel, but nonetheless, it looks a little bit better. And, you know, little gee whiz never went too far, right? So the folks at Felpro, where I got those gaskets from, were nice enough to send another set of spreader bars, and you see their spreader bars are longer, but I'm gonna throw them on the shelf for later use. I opted for the ones that match the valve covers I bought, but the nice part is they're even longer, so they really spread it out. And they're also powder coated, so much the better, right? That dresses the old girl up, doesn't it? Yeah, buddy. Now, while we want these tighter than just finger tight, you'll notice I'm not using two hands on the ratchet. I'm tightening it down till it's snug with one hand, but I don't want to go crazy and bend the valve cover up. So that is adequate. Brake booster's always in the way for this, ain't it? I think I'll give you a shorter extension for that one. Alrighty, put the PCV valve back in, and we'll be ready to do side number 2. Okay, y'all, both valve covers have been replaced, torqued down, gaskets changed out with the ones I showed you. We're going to do an oil change now because the oil, when I had them off, looked like it was a little on the dark, chewy side. I think we're going to go ahead and put some fresh synthetic in there, fire it up, and check for leaks. Thanks for watching, and again, please like the video, and by all means, please subscribe to the channel.